how did we do on the last test? Did you get more of them right? Were you able to improve? Great, that's all that we care about. You're doing a great job. But how do we take this to the next level? Because you might be thinking, Phoenix, this technique is great, but how do I apply this to my everyday life? How do I apply this to learning more complicated things faster? And that's what we are going to talk about today in detail. So first, we are going to pick a topic that requires us to memorize a lot of technical information. But I want to emphasize that we can pick any field with any technical information and you can make it work. You can apply this. And that's what I want to show you today. So, do you remember which classes in school had a lot of highly technical information, or what classes were most difficult to study, right? And they just required a lot of information? Which class would you say that was for you? What subjects? Some people tell me, oh, it was definitely math or history or definitely science, right? Because there's a lot of information that you need to be able to memorize. So what I want to do right now is we're going to pick one of these topics. Hopefully we pick the most difficult one, right? And we're just going to roll with that. So there's a lot of classes for us to choose from. I'm going to pick it for us since you're not here with me, right? We have biology, we have physics, we have chemistry. Chemistry had a lot of information that we had to memorize, right? You remember the periodic table of elements? Let's use that, right? I think that one's pretty complicated. There's a lot of information there. Let's see how we can apply the tools that you've learned in just your first 2 days to see if you can memorize the periodic table of elements. Let's see if we can do that. So first, I want to go over a few of the elements. So I'm going to pick a few of them, and we're just going to skim over them. And don't worry, this test that you're going to have today is going to be pretty quick. It's going to blow your mind how quickly you're now going to be able to memorize the periodic table of elements. So here's a few elements. Here at least are like the first few elements. We have hydrogen, helium, we have lithium, we have beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, and neon. Those are the first few elements. Let's memorize these together. So how do we do that? What was the first rule that we talked about that was the secret to memory? We have to turn everything into a picture, right? The secret is not in memory, but in your ability to construct pictures. So we need to turn each element into a picture. And then we have to link them together because that's what we learned yesterday. So we need to use emotion, we need to use visualization, we need to use action, and we need to exaggerate things. So let's do this together. Here we go. We're going to memorize this complicated list of information that we find in school, and we're going to see if these techniques really work. Are you ready? And go. Let's get started. Well, actually, you already memorized the list of the periodic table of elements. That's right. Yesterday, those lists of words that I gave you, those images actually represent all of the elements in the table. In other words, you were learning all of the elements without even realizing that you were studying the elements. And I think that's just so cool because I really believe that we learn best when we don't realize that we're learning. So let me show you what we did. The first word was hydrant, and that was to represent hydrogen. You see the association that I built there? It was an auditory association. Kind of sounds similar. So I just turned hydrogen into a hydrant. What was the next word? Well, the next word of the elements is helium. I need a way to associate helium in a way that it's easy for me to remember. So I just turned it into a helium balloon. You see? So I just transformed it into something that's more familiar to me. Remember all of the natural memory principles that we talked about yesterday? That's all we did. And what's the next word? The next word was batteries. This one is a little bit trickier. You need to practice your creativity to make these associations. So, in case you didn't know, lithium is an element that's inside of all batteries. And that's why I use that association. I know it's a little trickier. You don't have to use my associations. I'm just giving you examples of how I memorize technical information. You see? So I just turn all these things into easy images for me to memorize. What was the next one? The next one was barrels, right? Remember the barrels, how they were capturing all of these batteries? Well, the element that I was trying to memorize was beryllium. And you might be thinking, beryllium, barrel? Okay, there's a little association, but it's not exactly the same, Phoenix. What if I forget it? Well, you won't, because the images that I'm creating, they're just meant to trigger my brain to remember the information. It does not have to be perfect. These associations that you're building, they don't have to be perfect. They just have to be close enough to what you're trying to remember to help trigger you that memory that you need. You see? As an example, if I hear the word helium, I'm not going to think to myself, oh, was that nitrogen? Of course not. I'm going to think of helium because that's the trigger word for me. So you want to build associations that are more personal to you. So these examples that I'm giving you, they might not work for you. That's why you need to apply your creativity and you need to pick words that you know are going to help trigger you to remember what you need to remember. So that's what you want to do. You want to turn all of the information that you're trying to memorize into a memorable picture that's familiar to you, that's organized for you, that's going to be simple for you to recall. And when you do that, well, you're going to notice that your brain can memorize thousands and thousands of pieces of information very quickly if you're just able to turn these things into a picture. And this is the way your brain loves to learn. As an example, when I'm teaching Spanish, as an example, I have an entire course just dedicated to teaching people how to memorize and speak Spanish very quickly. I turn the entire language of Spanish into funny things to memorize, funny images. And your brain just absorbs all of that much easier. That's how we unlock our memory abilities, is by becoming like movie directors in our minds. That's why a lot of times people tell me, Phoenix, I didn't feel like I was studying. I felt like I just knew Spanish, as an example. Well, it's because we're just using the natural memory principles. We are learning the way the brain loves to learn. You see, we don't cram down information and hope to remember. No, we build movies, we build pictures, because when we do that, we don't forget the information. Okay, so back to the elements. The next one that we have is a boron. So I just used a board to represent that. Board, boron, it just helps me remember. The next one, carbon. So a lot of people don't know that diamonds have a lot of carbon on them. So that's the association that I used. Now, if that's a little bit too nerdy, that's okay. You can use other associations. You need to start using associations that are going to work for you, not for me. So as an example, if you don't like that whole carbon thing, right? I'm like, oh, I can't really relate that to the diamond. I don't like that association. Well, that's okay. Why don't you use like a car bond? You see? Car bond to help remind you of carbon. That's way easier. In fact, I'm going to change my association and use that one, you see? So I just came up with that one on the fly. So that's what you want to do. You want to build associations that are going to work for you. What's the next one? The next one is nitrogen. So the association that I used was a night because of the beginning of the word night, right? Nitrogen. I know it's a little far-fetched, but it works for me. Sometimes you'll be surprised. Some associations are kind of like a little far-fetched, but for one reason or another, you remember them. So that's what you want to do. You want to use associations that are going to work best for you. So let's finish with the last few words that we have. I also had oxygen. So I'm like, okay, how am I going to remember oxygen? So I just picture, okay, maybe like an oxygen mask or something. And that's the association that I use because oxygen mask is more familiar to me. And then we had fluorine, and the toothpaste have a lot of like fluoride on them. I'm like, oh, those sound the same, fluorine, fluoride. So I'm like, okay, that's a great picture for me to memorize. So I'm just going to use toothpaste because toothpaste is a lot more familiar and easy for me to memorize than fluorine, right? And finally, we had a big sign, a neon sign. I imagined it as neon sign. And that's it. That's the last word. And I just put this crazy story together. And in just a few short minutes, I memorized all of these elements. And I don't have to cram down this information. I don't have to read it over and over and over when I'm studying for the test. No, I just build these images once. And that's it. They're in my mind. They're in my memory. I'm not going to forget this story. Hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, neon. There we go. That's the story. It's in my head. I see the hydrogen with the balloons and it's exploding and there's the batteries and the barrels. And you see how easy this is? Well, of course, once you practice it, that's how I memorize very technical information. Hey guys, Phoenix here. I really hope that you've enjoyed that episode. And if you did enjoy that episode, make sure that you subscribe because we're going to be sharing a lot of really cool things in this channel. Alrighty, that's it from me. I'll see you in the next episode.